Okay, we're back. This is Latin 2, and we're going to continue our lesson here in chapter 24. We discussed yesterday the ablative absolutes. I hope you guys did okay processing that and thinking it through. If you have any questions on that, please give me an email or a text or something. Communicate with me so that I can help out. I want us to jump into our next part of our lesson here. It's going to be pretty short. And let me share my screen with you. And we will jump into it here. This is the second part of the lesson. Go ahead and put this on play. And this is on page 194 and 185. Today we're going to look at two very, very brief grammar lessons. Ablative absolutes took a little bit of time yesterday, but this is actually pretty short. But you need to kind of wrap your head around it. The first one is just horrible when you say it out loud. Passive periphrastic. It sounds like a disease you get if you travel to South America and swim in the Amazon or something. The passive periphrastic. Now, the name is horrendous, but it's really not that bad. You can see this poor puppy is just, please make it stop. And I'm sorry, my screen is in the way, but here's what that phrase simply means. The word periphrastic means paraphrase. So it simply means paraphrase of the passive. Paraphrase. Now, it doesn't seem all that bad. It sounds terrible to say, but the concept is not that bad. So let's jump into it and see what a passive periphrastic is. It's actually pretty simple. Check this out. It's a passive verb form consisting of a future passive participle. So you remember a future passive participle is when you have the present, you have present stem, and you add nd plus usaum. So you take a passive future participle and you add a form of zoom. By the way, the passive participle is often called a gerundive, like a gerund. We'll talk about that more later. But it's, in other words, it's the future passive participle plus a form of the word sum, and it's really not that bad. And by the way, this has nothing to do with ablative absolutes. This is a different part of the lesson. So what you learned yesterday, this is not connected to it in any way, okay? Except both has to do with participles, but they're different concepts. So remember, a passive, future passive participle plus a form of the word sum. So let's take a look and see what this looks like. In this sentence, hic liber mihi cum cura legendus eret. All right, so look, you've got the passive periphrastic. You can recognize it because you've got a participle that is future passive, and you know that it is because look, it's got the nd. It's the nd that tells you it's the present stem plus nd plus us aum, one of those endings. So you got legendus, and then you have a form of sum. In this case, you have arit. Ro aris arit, arimus aritus arit. This is the future third person singular form of sum. So legendus arit is the future passive participle plus a form of sum, and that makes the passive periphrastic. Well, that's not that hard. It's pretty easy concept. Let's talk about how we translate this, okay? How do we translate a passive periphrastic? Again, I'm sorry, my control thing is covering it up, but that's what it says. How do you translate a passive periphrastic? Well, let's look at this. All right, passive periphrastics, here's the idea, is they carry the idea of oughtness or necessary or obligatory or appropriate action. In other words, it's not just action that's happening, it's action that should happen. It ought to happen or it must happen. In other words, those are some of the words you'll use to help you translate. Let's walk us through a translation here. Hic is obviously this. It's a demonstrative pronoun. Book, liber means book. It's your subject of the sentence, right? Mihi, you should recognize that, blank mihi, mihi, meh, meh, right? That's your dative, to or for me, first person preposition, pronoun rather, excuse me. Cum is your preposition, meaning with, and it's followed by the object of the preposition, which is in the ablative singular, cura, meaning care. And then there's your passive periphrastic. And the way that it's translated is will have to be read. That is the literal translation. Will have to be read. So what does that look like here? This book will have to be read with care to me. All right, before we get too far here, something else I got to tell you about. Something called the dative of agent. This is the second grammar concept. It is almost always used with the passive periphrastic. And the dative of agent means this. All right. I'm sorry, I should have put that on where I would walk you through it here. So just wait here. Go back up to the top there. It says dative of agent. The word mihi is in the dative case, but it's called the dative of agent. And you're not going to translate it to or for. You're actually going to translate it with the word by, almost like it's ablative, but it's not. It's the dative of agent, is the thing that is doing, okay? It is the thing that is doing the action. So it's not being done to it, it's the thing doing the action, dative of agent, right? It's the agency. So in other words, the literal translation of this really is, this book will have to be read with care by me. And that's completely different than this book will have to be read to me. Not being read to, I'm the one that's going to be doing the reading. This book will have to be read with care by me. So the proper translation of a dative of agent is to say by whatever the word is. In this case, it's me. This book will have to be read with care by me. Now, if you remember, I said that an passive periphrastic has the sense of oughtness. So actually, a better translation should include the word must or ought. This book ought or must be read with care by me. This book ought to be read with care by me. This book must be read with care by me. So here's what you got. You got the passive periphrastic. So we've got the idea of ought. And then it's often paired with the dative of agent, which means you have to be prepared. Instead of saying to or for, which is what you're used to translating the dative with, you translate it by. This book ought to be read with care by me. Does that make sense? Okay. Take a second to process that. If you need to, pause this, because I'm going to give you a better, not the better translation, I'm actually going to give you the best translation on the next slide. Are you ready for it? If you need to, pause it and look this through, because here we're going to go to the best translation. Here's the best translation. The better translation is, this book ought to be read with care by me, but the best translation is, I ought to read this book with care. Wait, how did we get there? We just flip-flopped everything. Check this out. Normally, the word book here in the first sentence is actually the subject, but now it becomes the direct object. Instead of this book being the subject, it's the direct object, right? And the verb, which had been passive, now we're going to move it to active. Instead of ought to be read, it's ought to read, right? Instead of passive voice, it's active voice. And then the dative passive periphrastic by me, which was the object, now becomes the subject. I, instead of by me, it's I. So the translation, the best translation of this passive periphrastic and the dative of agent is to say, I ought to read this book with care. I ought to read this book with care. So as you're practicing this sentence, if you recognize a dative of agent and have a passive periphrastic, flip-flop it. The subject becomes the direct object. The by me, which is the dative phrase, dative agent, becomes the subject, and your verb moves from passive to active. I ought to read this book with care. And again, notice ought as is the passive periphrastic, that sense of oughtness. So that's the lesson for today. I hope that makes sense. Again, practice this, reread this, rewatch the video. I have a tutorial linked here as well. Make sure you, on the Google site, make sure you watch that. If you have further questions, email me or text me if you have any more. Love you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.